In this episode, I visit with Carter Keating, founder and president of the Texas Agricultural Connection, about agriculture issues in and around the Hill Country. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back for another episode. And I must say, we rarely have Aggies on this podcast, but we're going to have an Aggie on this podcast.
That's right.
So there you go. Carter Keating. Carter, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Carter, I can't remember where I came across you and your name and the Texas Agricultural Connection. It may have been Facebook, but at any rate, I checked you guys out. I thought you were doing some really interesting stuff. You have a really interesting background. Let's just jump into it. Could you tell us a little bit about your academic and professional background?
Sure. So I am from Victoria, Texas. My parents are in the car business, and we moved down there in 2002. And I grew up there, really enjoyed my time in Victoria. And then in 2016, I made the trip from Victoria over to the great College Station, Texas, to become an Aggie. I studied business and marketing there, advertising strategy, and I must have enjoyed my 4 years there because I decided to stay for another 2. I got my Master of International Affairs at the Bush School of Government and Public Service. I think in my junior or senior year of high school, I knew that public service was my passion. I knew that's what I wanted to do. And it was just a matter of figuring out what my highest and best use was, how best to pursue that. And so that certainly motivated my application to the Bush School and my interest there. I can't speak highly enough about that program. The faculty are great, the program's great, and I learned a lot. And so I graduated in May of 2022 with that Master of International Affairs. And I found myself in Austin, Texas, which is where I currently reside for the Texas Texas legislative session, and am working full-time on agricultural issues through Texas Agriculture Connection.
How did you make the pivot from international relations to agriculture in the great state of Texas?
So I was preparing to graduate from the Bush School, and I knew that I wanted to learn more about the Texas government processes. The Bush School had a very federal focus, and I wanted to learn more and get involved with the legislative and political process. And I was hopeful that I would be able to do both of those things while working on issues that had consequences for the people of Texas, and that solutions could provide benefit and relief to the people of Texas. And so in talking with some friends and family that had experience in the Texas political space, it became clear that an organization like Texas Agriculture Connection would give me the opportunity to do that. And then the next question is, why agriculture? And I think there are a couple important reasons for that. One is the need. There are important issues and challenges that members of the Texas agriculture industry face, whether that's the industry itself, farmers and ranchers, rural communities. And I was excited to at least try and be a part of working on solutions to those issues. The second thing I'll point out about why Texas Agriculture Connection has been able to get off the ground and work on some of these issues is how welcoming the Texas agriculture industry itself is. Everyone from the legislators working on these issues from both sides of the aisle, farmers and ranchers themselves, commodity associations, have all been very welcoming and have very much the mindset of, you want to work on rural water infrastructure, you want to work on farmer funding, come on, let's sit down and see if we can come to a solution and get that solution across the finish line. And I think that their willingness to welcome me and have me be a part of those discussions is what has enabled me to do that.
Carter, Texas A&M has a very well-known agricultural school and agricultural department, yet you came from a public service, even international relations, governmental component. Is that an interesting or unusual journey for an Aggie? Or not only does it make sense to you, but does it make sense from a public policy standpoint to not have that background in agriculture, but in business and now in public policy, moving into the role you currently hold?
I would say it's probably not a common transition, but I think that there are a lot of important benefits. I bring a different perspective with a business background and with an international affairs background. At the same time, it's right now in the past year, I've been drinking out of a fire hose a little bit, learning everything I didn't know about agriculture. And so it's been great to be able to apply what I do know and what I have learned, but also learn about agricultural issues and the issues that I didn't have experience with throughout my education.
My impression as an outside observer on agricultural issues in the current Texas political scene is that it's a largely nonpartisan issue. There's sort of team farmers or team ranchers or team agriculture, and it consists of, as you said, men and women on both sides of the aisle. Would that be a fair assessment from what you've seen?
I think that is certainly a fair assessment. You look at the issue of water and rural water infrastructure, and I think House Bill 10 and its companion bill in the Senate Bill 28 are both, I'm sure we'll talk about them later in the podcast, but both bills designed to uh, address the issue of water infrastructure in rural and urban communities. And one is filed by a Republican and one is filed by a Democrat. And so there is certainly people on both sides of the aisle, representatives on both sides of the aisle that are working on these issues. And I think that's what makes it so exciting is the opportunity to prioritize governance over all that other stuff.
Let's turn down to the Texas Agricultural Connection. Are you the founder of that organization?
Yes, I am the founder of that organization, and we got off the ground in October of last year.
What's the mission of the organization?
Our mission is to promote, support, and strengthen Texas agriculture. There are a few ways that we do that. The first one that I would highlight is the education component, and that is directed towards the general Texas population, educating the general Texas public about why agriculture is important, why it matters to the general Texas public, even if you're not directly involved in that industry. That takes place primarily for us at this point over social media. We have a monthly newsletter as well that we put out that highlights our progress as an organization and the issues that we're working on, but also just trying to build awareness around why Texas agriculture is such an important issue. Then there's the advocacy side of our work that has a more direct legislative component to it, working on a few different legislative issues. Not only at the beginning, it was certainly, okay, what are the legislative issues and the challenges that these communities and farmers and ranchers are facing? How do we craft a solution that can help to address those issues? But now it's trying to get those pieces of legislation across the finish line. And the audience there is certainly the reason that we were created is to benefit and strengthen the Texas agriculture industry. And so that is certainly the effort there with our legislative advocacy. And then there's a community support component. There are two pieces of that. The first is the TAC Youth and Agriculture Scholarship, which is a scholarship for Texas high school seniors, a $2,500 scholarship to pursue further education in agriculture. Involvement of youth in the agriculture industry is an important issue that Texas and the nation is dealing with. And so that scholarship is an attempt to try and address that issue. And then there's also a volunteer aspect to our community support. And that's a great opportunity for us to engage with organizations. I'm located here in Austin, so engaging with organizations in Central Texas right now that are working on agricultural issues, whether it's tangentially the Central Texas Food Bank and all of the great work that organization does, or whether it's an organization like Austin Farm Share that's working to educate farmers and ranchers and prepare them to join the industry themselves.
I'd like to turn to some of the issues, and you've touched on probably the one we should start with, which is water and rural water. What are the issues that you see, and do you see the legislature moving towards at least towards a resolution in this session?
You're exactly right. I think this podcast would be off the rails if we didn't start with water. In my research, it seems like just about every issue has water at its core. And I think there are a number of issues under or challenges under the umbrella of water. One is water access. So we know that you and I know that Texas is a great place to live. It's a great place to work, a great place to raise a family. And people from the United States and outside of the United States know that too. And so our population is growing. and that is going to put additional strain on our water resources. And so it's important that we are providing for the people that live here now and the people that will certainly move to Texas. So finding new avenues to access water, new avenues to conserve water, but also improvements to our state's water infrastructure, especially in our state's rural communities. Last year in 2022, we had more than 3,000 boil water notices in the state of Texas. We lose a significant amount of water to leaks in old and aging water infrastructure. But I think those are the challenges. But I'm optimistic that the Texas legislature this session is working towards progress in solving some of those issues. I mentioned House Bill 10, filed by Chairman Tracy King, and Senate Bill 28 by Chairman Charles Perry. That establishes a number of funds, the Texas Water Fund being one that is designed to direct resources towards improving rural water infrastructure, which is certainly the communities that need those improvements most. And there's also a water supply fund in those bills that will help to provide for more than 7 million acre feet of water in preparation for 2033. And that is designed to fund everything from desalination, water treatment, and other water access programs. So House Bill 10 has been a priority for the Texas House this session. And so I'm certainly excited about that and think that there's some meaningful progress being made on that particular issue. Outside of water, I'll point to three other issues, one being rural broadband access. And again, I think I'm excited that the Texas House has made that a priority and is working on that issue. House Bill 9 by Representative Trent Ashby is an important step towards providing broadband access to the more than 3 million Texans that don't have high-speed, reliable broadband access. Evidence suggests that broadband access improves health outcomes. It increases the educational opportunities that are available in rural communities. It makes farms and ranches more profitable and more competitive. And I think that the steps being made in that House bill, investments in rural broadband infrastructure, matching funds so that Texas can get access to the federal funds that are available for broadband infrastructure. And those investments are very important as we work to provide reliable internet access to Texas. Another issue is that I mentioned prior is incentivizing young people to enter the agriculture industry and get involved in the agriculture industry. I think there are a few components to that. The first is interest. I think here in Texas, we do a fairly good job of cultivating interest in agriculture and farming relative to other states. There's also an education component, ensuring that young people that are interested in getting involved in this industry are equipped with the knowledge that it takes to run a successful agricultural business in Texas. And then there is the access to capital component, which I would say is the primary barrier for young people getting involved in the agriculture industry. Whether we're talking about the price of land, the price of machinery, livestock, feed, the costs add up. And many people describe agriculture as an industry that if you don't marry into it or inherit it, it's extremely difficult to gain access to that industry and work in agriculture. And it's important that as a state and as a legislature, steps are being made to try and incentivize young people to get involved in the industry. Right now, only 7 or 8% of our producers are under the age of 35. And the average age of the farmer is right around 60 years old. I am excited about House Bill 2851 from Chairman Dwayne Burns that increases the maximum grant size of the Young Farmer Grant Program that the Texas Agriculture Finance Authority currently has from $20,000 to $35,000. And that's a matching grant. Say a young person under the age of 35 has the resources, $35,000 to put towards their agricultural business, then they can get access to another $35,000 to bring that total to $70,000 that they can use to purchase land or the machinery or education necessary to pursue an agricultural business. So I'm very excited about that bill. I know that there are a number of other pieces of incentivizing young people to get involved in the industry that we can pursue. But I am excited about that bill, and I think it's a great first step. And then a little bit more of a specific issue that I have seen take center stage in the agriculture space this legislative session is the right to farm issue. In 1981, it became Texas law that agricultural operations that would eventually become encompassed by municipalities, growing towns, could continue to operate their agricultural businesses. And that's been law since 1981, unencumbered by municipal regulations and those sorts of things that would inhibit their ability to run their agricultural businesses. I think in the past several years, some cities and municipalities have gotten a little heavy handed with their regulations on agricultural lands. We had a hearing a couple weeks ago where a farmer came and testified from North Texas, and he's a hay farmer. And the municipality came in with a regulation that your grass couldn't be higher than 8 inches. And as a hay farmer, that was certainly a difficult rule to abide by. And that was what he made his money doing. And so he continued to cultivate his hay. The city mowed his crop down and sent him the bill for it. And so certainly that ignited the issue, the right to farm issue. And I've seen that take center stage this legislative session. House Bill 1850 from Chairman Dwayne Burns, House Bill 2308 from Representative Trent Ashby. Both of those bills are dealing with this issue and strengthening the right to farm and ensuring that agricultural operations in the state of Texas are permitted to continue cultivating.
There are some other issues that I wanted to raise with you. Yes, or this week I'm having a podcast series on the business response to the coming conflict with China. And one of the topics was Chinese purchase of American agricultural assets, specifically land. And the person I was interviewing said they're not necessarily doing this to get product to ship to China. They're doing it to potentially disrupt the American agricultural system and the food supply system down the road. And it really brought up a larger conversation that you and I have had around, is land a national security issue? And is agriculture a national security issue? Is food supply a national security issue? And are there things the state government can do, as opposed to perhaps the federal government, around these issues? And certainly one of the most public or well-known initiatives in this legislature is around land ownership or purchase by Chinese. But this entire ongoing discussion really, to me, says not only does everything start with land, but everything flows from land and agriculture. And so I was wondering, how would you help a legislator think through some of these issues? Or perhaps how does your constituency or the farmers you work with, how do they think through some of these issues? And can we put a legislative solution in place, or do we have to look to the federal government?
I think that there are a couple ways that we have been able to work with legislators on this issue and other issues. And I think it starts with, first of all, good information. So ensuring that when we're talking about an issue like foreign-owned farmland, that legislators are equipped with up-to-date information on the percentages of Texas farmland that are owned by foreign entities, corporations, or individuals, or foreign countries. And I think in my research, I've been surprised to find how difficult sometimes up-to-date information on those stats are. And so I think the first one is equipping legislators with that information, but also looking at the different issues that bubble to the surface when we're talking about foreign-owned farmland. One issue that I have seen discussed extensively is private property rights and the right of that owns a plot of agricultural land to sell to whomever they'd like and to whoever offers them the best price. So it is taking into account things like that, private property rights. Also, there are a number of investments from foreign corporations and entities in Texas that have created jobs that are adding to the economy, taking that into consideration, but also, as you brought up, the national security threat. And I do think there are valid considerations there in national security threats. And I think that those are the different things that the legislature is weighing this session, trying to craft a piece of legislation that isn't infringing on the private property rights of Texans, isn't working against the positive economic benefits of foreign investment in the state of Texas, but is addressing those security risks in a responsible way. And I think that we'll see that this legislative session, I expect to see some form of that legislation pass.
You mentioned two points rather I want to pick up on. Number one is private property rights. And number two is foreign investment leading to economic development. And I'm going to even throw a third or perhaps a fourth in, which is housing and tax bases. And I hope our listener leaves this podcast with at least the thought that this is not a single issue. There's not one issue you can silo and say, we've got the solution, because they're all interrelated. And whether you enjoy a 5-dimensional chess game, fair enough. But you have to think through multiple issues. And you touched on two of them, obviously, economic development and private property rights. But with these other issues around a growing Texas population generally, and the numbers that we hear bandied about of growth of Texas are just still astronomical. But with rural land moving from agricultural use to perhaps housing or other municipal uses, and families, children who may not have the same passion around farming as their parents, or if their parents either retire or pass away. How do you think through all of the moving parts together? Or is it, frankly, with your academic and professional background, that's one of the things that you really enjoy, is trying to put all the pieces together and educate those who are making those decisions, or at least legislating for us, to help move forward in the best way?
That is certainly something I enjoy, but that's not to say that it's easy. Like you said, there are a ton of moving parts when you're dealing with population increases, all of the issues that we just talked about. Population increases are playing a role. You're talking about water access and the need for those resources, housing, power. And then I watched several of your previous podcasts on talking about this tension between rural and urban communities. And I think that's a real thing. I think that I'm confident that as we grow, I'm hopeful that we can do that in an intentional way, prioritizing things like high density housing over low density housing, so that we're not eating so much into some of our state's most productive agricultural land. And we're dealing with some of these issues while being conscientious of their impact on other issues like our state's water resources and the strain on our infrastructure. But also that our state is taking the approach of investing now and making these investments in preparing our state for the inevitable increase in population, so that those investments can pay dividends later. And so it is a spider web of issues that all have an impact and effect on one another. And I think it's just working to try and find solutions that address concerns without having the negative impact on some of those other issues when doing so.
Carter, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode, but I was wondering if our listeners wanted any more information on yourself, on the Texas Agricultural Connection, or really any of the topics we've touched on in this podcast, what would be the best place or places for them to go?
Our website would be a great place to start. That's at www.txagconnection.com. We have a monthly newsletter that I'd encourage you to sign up for. You can keep tabs on us and the issues that we're working on. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, to, again, stay up to date on the issues that we're working on, the progress of those issues, but as well, stay up to date on Texas agriculture in general.
Carter, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to visit with me. I'm very interested in these issues. I hope we can continue our conversation, and I hope maybe I can call upon you after our legislative session ends to maybe give us a wrap up of what got passed or what didn't get passed, and what some of the next steps going forward might be.
That sounds great. I look forward to providing an update for you.
This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Hill Country Podcast, and I hope you will subscribe, rate, and review our podcast wherever great podcasts are listened to. Also, if you'd like to be on the Texas Hill Country Podcast, please shoot me an email at tfox@tfoxlaw.com or give me a shout. I'd love to have you on the only award-winning podcast for the Hill Country.